Hi guys, it's Mrs. Broussard and we are talking watershed models. As we have already looked at in class, a watershed is the area of land where all of the surface water and the groundwater are going to be flowing into a larger body of water. And we know because of gravity that water is going to flow from higher elevation to lower elevation. And we get to see all of this in our model. This model helps us to achieve several goals, one of which is to look at the different effects of point versus non-point source pollution, which we'll see 3 examples of each here. And it's also going to help us see what happens when we pump water from underground from an aquifer. So let's get started and look at everything. This model has 2 types of surface water. One is over here. It's got the river. So when we pour water down here, or if it rains, the river carries it down into a larger body of water, which in this case happens to be another source of surface water, the ocean. You can see we have a lot going on here. This is a clearly a very populated area. We've got farm animals going on. We've got cars with roadways. We've got farms and chemical plants. We've got boats. So clearly there's a lot of opportunity for the water to become polluted. Right now it looks pretty good, pretty clean. We're going to change that. Before we look at that as well, I'm going to turn this model around so you guys can get a view of the groundwater because that's always underground. You can see over here, even though the plastic's a little bit hard to see through, there's actually a little pocket down here that's full of water. This water is being trapped in between layers of rock. I'm going to let you guys peek in a little bit and see how this is working. I'm going to lift up the lid and you can see there is some water in that pocket underground. And there's rocks trapping that water in place. Okay, now that we know where our sources of water are, we're going to start polluting it. So we're back to our model. Let's look at non-point source pollution first. First, we're going to look at this farm. We see the tree, we see the little animals, and what do animals always need to do after they eat? They need to poop. So what we're going to do is add a few pieces of feces right next to the farm animals because animals do what they've got to do. Unfortunately though, even though their farmer was able to put an exterior fence up, they did not put a fence blocking the water or any extra plants blocking the water from pollution sources. So we have the ability to get this water polluted. Now this is going to be non-point source pollution because non-point source pollution starts somewhere in the watershed on the land and then has to get sprayed in through water runoff from rain. We're going to do that with this. So we're going to use, see how good my aim is. It's like a carnival game. So we're going to shoot the feces from the farm and into the watershed through the river. And so we have all of these little pieces of feces going from the farm down the river and finally into that larger body of water, the ocean. We can see some of those pieces start to go into the ocean.
And the boat.
And the boat. That poor boat has chicken feces in it. And we also have other sources of non-point pollution where they start on the land and then get washed in through the rain. We have litter, things like soda cans, plastic wrappers, general garbage that you would see like in this dumpster that accidentally got turned over. Sometimes non-point source pollution happens on accident. Sometimes it can be on purpose. Just like before, it's non-point source pollution. So we are sending it down the river from the grass, and then it flows downhill.
A little bit of feces and
Oh, we got a little bit of feces in there.
a little bit of litter too.
A little bit of litter. And that's the thing, right? Even the rain has trouble getting all this stuff down. Sometimes it just stays in certain areas and pollutes a single area. So now we've got our feces in the river. We've got our litter in the river. Now we're going to show you one last non-point source pollution. This one's happening from our roadway where people drive. When cars drive, they happen to leave oil and gas around quite often. So what we're going to do to show that is put a few drops of this car oil right here. And then we're going to let the rain do its thing. And we'll see that as it rains, that water is going to go down into the river. And then that water will actually go down the river into the ocean, and some of it you'll notice has actually absorbed into the grass if it's going into the ground, that means it's also going to be affecting our groundwater. So it could possibly pollute 2 different sources of water. Okay, that's all of our non-point. Again, it starts somewhere on the watershed that's on the land. It gets washed in through runoff from the rain. Now we're going to look at something called point source water pollution, where that pollution is actually being directly introduced to the water. It does not require rain to run it off into the watershed. So we are, instead of looking at the spray bottle, going to look at my big picture of pollution. Okay, so using my big picture of pollution, we're going to start over here with Mr. Boat. I don't know if you noticed, but Mr. Boat has a little bit of a problem, which is a hole in the side of it. And if this is an oil boat, that's going to cause a leak from the boat into the ocean. So as it's going around, it's going to be dumping some oil directly into the ocean. That is a point source. We can see that source directly polluting the watershed. We also, over here, have a farm silo. Farm silos are where they store things like grain or other products from a farm. And in here, they actually have a pipe that's usually supposed to run back around their farm, but it's broken and it's leaking into the ocean. So as I pour this into the top of the silo, we're going to see it trigger that broken pipe. And ooh, that's a big point source of pollution.
That's some nasty water.
That's some nasty water.
Don't want to drink that.
We do not want to drink that. And then lastly, our chemical plant. This is an example of a purposeful type of point source pollution. They decided they didn't want to take the time to dump their chemicals properly and in a responsible way. So they thought, we'll just run it out through the sewer system. So when they're done processing their chemicals, they just dump it all out and then it goes into the ocean. So you can see after all those different kinds of pollution happening at the same time, we've gone from an ocean that looked pretty clean to one that I don't think we'd want to drink out of, wash in, or use to cook our food. It's going to be a terrible source of water.
That boat's having a hard time.
That boat's about to sink. Okay, but before we wrap it up, I am going to show you one more thing about our groundwater. Remember we said that groundwater is underground, but that also means that we can pull it up from underground to use that as a water source. Remember, this water ends up underground because of the water cycle. So whenever it rains, some of it falls to the ground and gets absorbed into the ground. But we also have some pockets of water deeper underground called aquifers. And this is an area where the rock has little tiny spaces in between it and the water gets trapped in between. But if we add a pumping system to this water, if we go deep down and get that water out, we can actually pump up the water from the aquifer below and use it to drink, to shower, to cook food. Places like San Antonio actually use a lot of aquifers for their well water. So we can just pull that back down and up again. But you'll also notice that can be met with problems too. One thing that can happen is if we overpump these areas and they don't stay replenished and they don't stay with the same water level, the ground above them will actually start to sink down because they're underground. When we pull all that water out of there and the ground just collapses, that's called subsidence or subsidence, where the ground beneath subsides and falls away and you get a sinkhole. So I hope you enjoyed the watershed model and dirtying the water with me. The goal is that if we see this in science class, we can help avoid it in real life because there are lots of real life problems that come from having an unhealthy watershed. Remember, we all live in a watershed, so if we pollute it, it becomes our problem.